Imagine an army so long that, standing at the very rear, you cannot see where it begins. And it is not just a chain of soldiers, but an entire moving city. Kitchens send up smoke, tents are struck at dawn, medics bind wounds, engineers drag tools and logs, and alongside the column walk merchants selling bread and wine right on the march. In this video, you will step inside a Roman legion on the move hour by hour, step by step. And by day's end, you may ask yourself, would I even last a single day beside the soldiers of Rome? To understand how a Roman march worked, we have to look at the numbers, and they are shocking. In the height of the empire, a typical field force could include 2 full legions, about 13 to 14,000 trained legionaries. But they did not march alone. With them moved the auxiliaries, about 5,000 to 6,000 warriors, Numidian cavalry, Syrian archers, Germanic infantry, slingers from Hispania. These were allies without Roman citizenship who served for pay and the hope of earning that citizenship. That already brings us to nearly 20,000 armed men. Now add the people who made the march possible, about 3,000 to 4,000 cooks, slaves, servants, and army laborers. They cared for the mules, cooked, repaired weapons, set up tents, and hauled gear. Some were on the army rolls, others belonged to senior officers. Now the draft power. On campaign, they brought along about 4,500 to 5,000 mules, plus the horses of officers, cavalrymen, and couriers. Each pack animal carried up to 130 kilograms, firewood, stakes, rations, siege tools, even disassembled artillery. Add it all up, and you have a column of 25,000 to 30,000 living beings. People, horses, mules, oxen, wagons, weapons. And that does not count casual merchants, local guides, and runners moving between villages and forts. The historian Polybius called the legion's march a moving wall of flesh, and he did not exaggerate. A marching legion stretched 8 to 12 kilometers. Ancient writers warned, on a Roman march, order mattered more than bravery. The head of the column might be crossing a river while the tail was still tearing down the night camp. How do you move such a monster every day and keep it from collapsing under its own weight? Let's see, starting with a Roman morning. The march began while the world still slept, between 3 and 4 in the morning, during the 4th watch. The first sound was not clashing steel or shouted orders, but the dull gallop of horses. The speculatores' eyes and ears of the legion rode out. They were more than scouts. They were elite. They moved ahead of the column to find ambushes, watch the enemy, assess the route, and check suspicious villages. Their task: make sure nothing could stop the advance of the Roman serpent. Meanwhile, in camp, centurions woke their men with a short blast of the cornu. Nothing was improvised. Each contubernium, the basic, living 8 of soldiers, took down its leather tent, packed gear, checked weapons, tightened armor straps, and examined their sandals. Most important, every man carried his world on his back. Rome did not issue wagons for personal kit. One legionary hauled 20 to 30 kilos, his sword, shield, javelins, a pot, 3 days of dry rations, stakes for fortifications, and digging tools. They were not only fighters, they were builders, porters, and the mobile laborers of war. At the same time, the High Command reviewed the night's reports. The legatus, the military tribunes, and the chief engineer studied messages from couriers and scouts, and chose the day's route. If possible, they avoided marshes, rocky passes, and places suited to ambush. The goal was to keep the march steady and predictable, yet never vulnerable. In those same hours, the animals were readied, mules fed, wagons inspected, and the impedimenta. The baggage train was arranged with the same discipline as the troops. One mistake there could stop the entire column. Shortly before sunrise, The head of the column was already moving. The noise was minimal. Discipline was absolute. They marched in silence. No idle talk, no laughter, no songs. The idea was simple. No one should know Rome was coming until it was too late. At the most dangerous point, the front moved the vanguard. This was not a couple of pickets, but a deliberately built combined unit. Fast, flexible, lethal. Rome knew a sudden blow against a long column could mean ruin if the alarm did not reach the core in time. So the vanguard was made of elite auxiliary troops, Numidian and Thracian, light cavalry masters of quick maneuvers off-road, Gauls with hunters' instincts, Cretans and Syrians with long-range bows. A screen of light infantry moved with them, lightly burdened, ready to run, strike, or withdraw in seconds. Their mission was to clear and secure the road before the main body arrived. That meant breaking log traps, checking pitfall holes and buried spikes, inspecting silent settlements where enemies might hide, and fighting quick skirmishes with enemy scouts. But the vanguard did more than fight. It was the early warning system. In forested Germania, where thick woods killed visibility, the distance between the vanguard and the main body could stretch to 3 kilometers. That buffer let them send signals, call for reinforcements, or fall back without throwing the whole column into chaos. Writers like Vegetius and Tacitus stressed, losing the vanguard in a stretched-out march often meant panic, dissolution, and death. It was the first line of defense and the most fragile. So veterans with decades of campaigning were assigned there. They could decide on the spot and knew they were the first to enter danger. If they failed, no one else would have time to act. Right behind the vanguard came the quiet but decisive men of the march, the agrimensors, the military surveyors. With simple tools like the groma and a water level, they performed tasks that could decide the fate of a whole campaign. They chose the site of the knight's camp. Before the first tent was raised or the first shield set down, they marked the borders of the future castrum, the fortified camp with stakes and ropes. There could be no mistake. The site had to meet near mathematical standards: a clean water source, firm and well-drained ground, a slight rise for visibility, access to wood and stone for reinforcement, and, if possible, an open field to deploy for battle. And all of that had to be set within hours before the first centuries arrived. A stalled legion without a camp is a perfect target. Near the surveyors kept the command post. The legatus, the legion's top commander, did not tramp in the ranks, nor hide at the rear. He took a strategic position, apart, yet accessible, surrounded by his guard, tribunes, and a small staff of clerks and aides. From there, decisions flowed. Change the route, answer a scout report, adjust to terrain, weather, or enemy movement. Orders spread through the column by mounted couriers, cursores, riding to the head, the flanks, and the tail. Everything was done precisely, quietly, without delay. Writers like Frontinus in the Stratagems give cases where a single bad campsite wrecked an entire campaign. A field without drainage turned to swamp after night rain. An overlooked hill became an enemy gun line. A river too shallow failed to guard a flank. Rome knew these lessons. And what amazes is that this was not a special operation, but routine, day after day, as if war had been scripted from the very first step. Then came the heart, the main mass, the nerve of the legion. Here marched veterans and recruits, stake carriers and tool men, those who quite literally carried Rome on their backs. The corps was about 13,000 legionaries, 10 cohorts per legion, each split into centuries of roughly 80 men. Alongside them moved thousands of servants, slaves, and animal handlers, about 4,000 more people, and many mules, each with up to 130 kilograms of load. What impressed most was not the number, but the discipline of movement. The march was organized in a way that feels modern. Every century knew its place. Veterans set the pace up front. Recruits were kept in the middle, surrounded by experienced men so they would not fall apart. Habitual troublemakers were placed toward the rear under close eye. They did not move in battle order, but as a narrow column 2 or 3 abreast, adapting to the ground. That let the snake weave through valleys, ancient paths, tight passes, and mountain tracks without losing cohesion. Orders flowed by horse and by signal. Trumpets and cornu marked the pace, halts and alarms. But the whole machine rested on one simple fact: the weight on the soldier. One man carried 20 to 30 kilos. Armor, lorica segmentata or chainmail, the scutum shield, the gladius sword, a pilum javelin, stakes, a shovel, a pot, a water flask, spare clothing, dry rations, and cooking odds and ends. For this, Romans earned the nickname Marius's mules, Muli Mariani, after the Republican reform of Gaius Marius. Each man carries his own kit. A typical day's march covered 20 to 30 kilometers, and that sacred average held. No more, no less. Go too far, and you exhaust the men and invite attack. Go too short, and you slow the campaign and court risk. The pace was calculated, the effort distributed. The legion did not rush, it advanced. If someone collapsed, the rule was simple. If near and the ground allowed, help. If not, leave him. Efficiency outranked pity. Behind the living wall came the thing no general could forget: the baggage train. It fed the legion away from home, and, paradoxically, was its weakest point. Called the impedimenta, the hindrances, it was treated like the heart of supply. Here they hauled grain and salt, barrels of vinegar, construction tools, disassembled ballistae, scrolls of maps and orders, spare tents, hides and cloaks, footwear, medicines, blankets, everything needed to keep the legion independent for weeks. The train meant hundreds of mules and oxen, each load carefully assigned. Wagons were reinforced, thick timber, double wheels, leather-bound axles, handled by skilled drivers. Some were enslaved, some hired. Many had served the same legion for years and were, in practice, part of the machine. But the train was slow, painfully slow. So its place was carefully chosen, usually in the column's center or just behind the main body, covered by the rear guard and side patrols. One broken cart, one injured mule, one lost load could endanger the whole march. Josephus, writing on Titus's Judean campaigns, said orders for the impedimenta were almost as strict as combat rules. No load removed without permission, no wagon abandoned. Disorder brought harsh punishment, sometimes immediate and physical. With the train moved key specialists, medics with knives and bandages, cooks with hand mills and kettles, blacksmiths, scribes, interpreters. They led reserve animals, 2 spare horses and mules, in case key beasts went lame or died. In dangerous lands, whole detachments of light infantry and cavalry were assigned to guard the train. Because if the train fell, the legion could not eat, sleep, or fight, and the most disciplined army would become a starving crowd. If the vanguard were the eyes and the train the heart, the rear guard was the invisible shield. Marching at the rear was not a punishment, but a duty that demanded a cold head. The rear guard consisted of rotating units, auxiliary archers, light cavalry, light infantry. These were hardened men, used to constant alertness and the knowledge that danger came from behind. They shielded the train, gathered stragglers, watched the flanks where sight lines were poor, and moved fast against surprise attacks from the rear. The threat was not only tactical, but psychological. A small attack from behind could spark panic, a rumor among servants and allies, A scream in the wrong place, a misunderstood horn, and the column might collapse. So the rear guard stayed disciplined, and its units rotated regularly to keep minds sharp. It also enforced the rules. Deserters trying to slip away at the tail were seized and often executed on the spot in critical campaigns. Discipline did not end when a man stepped out of line. It followed him to his last step. History taught Rome brutally. In the Teutoburg forest, in the 9th year of our era, 3 legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus were annihilated by Germanic tribes with a chain of flank and rear attacks. The poor link between head and tail, the heavy forest, and the stretched column left no chance. It was the worst disaster of the High Empire, and a logistical trauma after which rear guards were strengthened and taught to act proactively, with their own side patrols, messengers, and even engineers. There were also men who marched neither at front nor back. They moved along the edges, vanishing into brush, climbing hills, and appearing where no one expected. They were the guardians of the flanks, the watchmen of the sides. If the legion's eyes looked forward and its shield covered the rear, the flanks were the constant vulnerability. 2 open sides of a line stretched 10 or more kilometers. To guard them, Rome relied on mobile, discreet patrols. They did not keep to the road. They moved parallel, cut through woods, climbed heights, checked side paths, descended ravines, and slipped into roadside villages. Their job was to see without being seen, to spot danger before it turned fatal, and if needed, strike fast and hard, neutralizing threats before they reached the core. The flank guard was mostly light auxiliary cavalry Numidians, Thracians, Iberians, on horses trained for broken ground, supported by light infantry with minimal load for ambush and pursuit in thickets. In regions like Germania or Dacia, Rome recruited local guides who knew the land best and where enemies loved to strike. Their day was harder than others. They covered more distance, slept less, ate poorly, yet kept eyes clear and minds quick. They protected not only the sides, but the column's strategic integrity. Caesar's Gallic War records how experienced flankers preempted ambushes in mountains, where tribes waited at sharp bends. In Britannia, entire detachments sometimes went ahead to scan both sides of a valley before letting the column pass. One mistake on a flank was not one life at risk, but a gap kilometers wide. So veterans with initiative, terrain sense, and autonomy filled these roles. On the edges, there were no shouted orders and no trumpet calls, only silence, trees, and the chance of stumbling upon someone ready to kill you. All of this meant nothing if, at day's end, the beast in motion could not stop safely. That required building, every evening, a fortified town from scratch. As the legion reached the site marked by the agrimensors, it turned into an automatic construction corps. Everyone knew his task. Every group had done it dozens, if not hundreds of times. No improvisation. Even if the soil was uneven, muddy, or rocky, the order was fixed. Fortify first, rest later. First came the ditch, a defensive trench around the perimeter, usually about 2 meters deep and 3 wide. The dug earth was thrown inward, forming a rampart to hold the wooden stakes carried all day. Those stakes called valley were part of every legionary's kit. No campaign went without them. Then they laid out the 4 main gates: the Porta Praetoria, the main entrance, the Porta Decumana, the rear gate, and the 2 side gates, Sinistra and Dextra. Guards went on post at once, even before the wall was complete. Inside the boundary, the camp was quartered. Tents were pitched strictly by rank. Officers in the center, regular troops on the flanks, auxiliaries in designated sectors, animals in their zones. At the center rose the Praetorium, the commander's tent, with a portable altar beside it. There, they offered sacrifice, read omens, and held councils. The camp's streets followed a standard plan, straight and perpendicular, wide enough for fast troop movement, and to make key points obvious. Storehouses, kitchens, even latrines. Yes, even the latrines had a set place. The astonishing part, all of this took under 4 hours. Vegetius and Josephus state plainly that Rome's ability to turn any field into a working fortress was one of its greatest weapons. While enemies slept under the sky, the legion slept behind walls, with arms at hand, supplies in place, escape routes, and signals planned. And this was not a request. Even for a single night in seemingly safe country, fortification was doctrine and part of the legion's identity. Thanks to this repeatable organization, Rome could advance without relying on towns, friendly forts, or allied inns. The legion carried everything, even its own city. When the last stake was driven, the last tent stretched, and the last sentry posted, silence fell over the camp. And then came the most tense part of the day, the night. Unlike other armies that took night as rest and song, Rome treated it as a new phase. At night, the legion did not sleep. It watched. Each contubernium received its ration: grain, salt, vinegar, and portions of dried meat if available. Soldiers sat by tiny, near-invisible fire's flames, kept low so as not to betray the camp. They cooked without frills, ground wheat on hand mills, and boiled a thick porridge called pulse. Sometimes they mixed vinegar with salted water to make pasca the sour soldiers' drink. In parallel, medics treated wounds, set splints, and applied honey vinegar salves. Animals were brushed, fed, and watered. Wagons, harness, and gear were repaired at once. Nothing could delay the morning start. At this time, the orders for the next day were read. Centurions received instructions from the tribunes who had come from the praetorium. Punishments were announced, warnings given, and, if needed, executions carried out calmly. So all remembered, discipline does not sleep. The chief law of a Roman knight was silence. No loud laughter, songs, or chatter. Even footsteps were muffled. The reason was simple. The enemy might be listening, and order had to hold even in the dark. Night patrols were strict. Each century received the day's password, the tessera, and had to present it at checkpoints. Watches rotated about every 3 hours, with overlap, so no one burned out. The penalty for sleeping on guard was the harshest: death by stoning at the hands of one's own contubernium. Cruel, but effective. No one forgot what was at stake. Even lying down, a soldier kept his shield within reach, his sword at his side, his sandals ready to slip on in seconds. If alarm came, every man knew where to run, what gate to hold, what formation to take. The legion was not caught off guard, it did the catching. And so, over 24 hours, what seems like just a march reveals itself as a flawless choreography of survival, calculation, and total control over time and space. A Roman legion was not only men, it was planning, discipline, and a doctrine that turned any hostile land into an extension of the empire. At once, machine, beast, and city. It marched like a mechanism, breathed like a living body, and rose like a portable fortress every single day. Now, having walked beside it for a day, ask yourself, would you endure this routine for even a week? If you enjoyed this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And, as the Romans said, may Mars keep you in battle.